I used to think my marriage to Elena was perfect. She was stunning, ambitious, and charismatic, the kind of woman who could light up any room she walked into. People would tell me how lucky I was, and for a while, I believed them. But now, as I sit in the stillness of my car, outside our suburban house, I realize just how blind I've been. The first signs were small, almost imperceptible. She started coming home late from her new marketing job, claiming she had to network at client dinners. I wanted to believe her. I truly did. So, I ignored the faint trace of cologne on her clothes, the vague answers when I asked her how the events went, and the way she avoided my gaze whenever I pressed too hard. Then came the fights. At first, they were over trivial things, the way I left my shoes near the door, or how I didn't fold the laundry her way. But they escalated quickly. She became volatile, throwing accusations at me out of nowhere. "You don't support my career. You're so boring, always stuck in your little routine." It felt like she was looking for excuses to be angry with me. I tried to fix things. I planned date nights, brought home her favorite wine, and even surprised her with a weekend getaway. Each effort was met with indifference or complaints about her workload. "I don't have time for this," she snapped one evening, scrolling through her phone as I stood there holding tickets to her favorite show. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but I convinced myself I was being paranoid. I loved her, and love, I thought, was about trust. But the cracks were spreading. One night, as we lay in bed, I caught her texting someone. She claimed it was her friend, Mia, venting about her boyfriend, but her tone was too flustered, her explanation too rehearsed. I didn't push it yet. Now, as I watch her through the living room window, laughing on the phone and sipping wine like she doesn't have a care in the world, I can't help but feel a knot of anger and dread tightening in my chest. Something is wrong, and I'm done ignoring it. The nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't let me rest. I told myself I wasn't the kind of man who snoops, but when trust is eroded, desperation creeps in. That night, after Elena had fallen asleep, I took her phone from the nightstand. My hand shook as I swiped the screen, navigating through her messages. Mia's name appeared at the top of her texts, just as she claimed. But when I opened the conversation, the messages were innocuous, a casual exchange about weekend plans and skincare tips. Something about it felt too perfect, too staged. That's when I noticed another name buried further down the list. "David, work?" I clicked it. The messages hit me like a freight train. "David, can't stop thinking about last night. You were intoxicating. Elena, you make me feel alive. I wish I could stay longer next time." My breath caught in my throat. I scrolled further, each exchange worse than the last. Details of their rendezvous spilled out, from hotel room numbers to whispered promises of escaping there. Mundane lives. I felt rage, humiliation, and heartbreak swirl inside me, but above all, I felt clarity. The doubts, the fights, the indifference, it all made sense now. She wasn't just drifting away from me. She was actively betraying me. The next morning, I acted as if everything was fine. I kissed her cheek before she left for work, suppressing the bile rising in my throat as she smiled at me like nothing had changed. "I've got a late meeting tonight," she said casually, sipping her coffee. "Take your time," I replied with a grin, masking the storm brewing inside me. That evening, I followed her. I parked a few blocks away from the restaurant where her meeting was supposed to be. From the shadows, I watched as she emerged from her car, laughing into her phone. A man in a sharp suit greeted her at the entrance, a man I assumed was David. They embraced, his hand lingering on the small of her back. My fists clenched as I watched them enter the restaurant together. I wanted to storm in, to confront them, to expose her for the liar she was. But I held back. Confrontation could wait. I needed proof. I waited outside for hours, until they finally emerged. To my horror, they didn't part ways, but instead drove off together in his car. I followed, my heart pounding in my chest, to a luxury hotel on the other side of town. I didn't need to go inside to know what was happening. The truth was staring me in the face, and it was uglier than I ever imagined. When I finally returned home at night, I was a different man. The hurt was still there, but it was now accompanied by a cold, calculating resolve. The next few days were a blur of careful planning. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. The hurt and anger that once consumed me had hardened into determination. I knew Elena wasn't just unfaithful. She was deceitful, manipulative, and brazen. This wasn't about saving our marriage anymore. It was about making sure she felt the weight of her actions. On Friday, she told me she'd be working late again. Her eyes met mine briefly as she made the excuse, but there was no guilt, no hesitation. It was almost insulting how little effort she put into lying now. "That's fine," I said calmly, smiling in a way that even surprised me. "I'll keep myself busy." She left the house around 7 p.m., dressed to the nines in a red dress I'd bought her for our last anniversary. Ironic, really. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed my keys. I already knew where she'd be going. By the time I reached the hotel, I was ready. I had a discreet recording device, my phone camera primed, and the resolve to see this through. I approached the front desk, feigning casual curiosity. "Excuse me," I said to the receptionist, sliding a crisp bill across the counter. "I'm looking for my wife. She's meeting a colleague in room 306. Can you confirm if she checked in?" The receptionist hesitated, but the cash in her hand seemed to make up her mind. "Yes, they checked in about 30 minutes ago." That was all I needed. I made my way to the third floor, my footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. My heart was pounding, not from nerves, but from the anticipation of finally exposing her lies. Standing outside the room, I paused. Muffled voices and faint laughter filtered through the door. Then silence. I turned on my phone's camera, pressed record, and knocked firmly. "Who is it?" Elena's voice called out, annoyed. "It's room service," I said, deepening my voice. A few seconds passed before the door opened slightly. Elena stood there, her hair disheveled, the strap of her dress slipping off her shoulder. Behind her, a shirtless man, David, was sprawled on the bed. Her face went pale when she saw me. "Mark? What the hell are you doing here?" she stammered, trying to slam the door shut. But I was faster. I pushed it open and stepped inside. "I could ask you the same thing, Elena," I said coldly, panning my phone's camera to capture the scene. The rumpled sheets, David's stunned expression, and Elena's obvious guilt. "This isn't what it looks like," she shrieked, grabbing for my phone. "Save it," I snapped, stepping back. "I have all the evidence I need." David tried to speak, but I cut him off. "Don't bother explaining. I'm not here for you." "But you—" I turned to Elena, my voice steady despite the fury boiling beneath. "You're going to regret this." She started screaming at me, hurling insults and excuses in equal measure, but I didn't care. I'd seen enough. Without another word, I walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, her lies and betrayal laid bare. I didn't go straight home after leaving the hotel. I needed time to clear my head and channel my rage into something productive. Sitting in my car in a nearby parking lot, I reviewed the footage I had just captured. Every damning detail was there. The hotel room, Elena's shocked face, and David's pathetic attempt to cover himself with a sheet. It was all the proof I needed. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the screen. I should have felt crushed, maybe even broken, but what I felt instead was liberation. The illusion was shattered, and with it, any lingering doubts about the woman I'd married. By the time I got home, it was nearly midnight. I made a beeline for my office, locking the door behind me. I didn't want to see Elena's face when she returned. Instead, I began organizing my next steps. The first thing I did was email the footage to myself and store it on an external hard drive. This wasn't just a petty move. I knew that in the inevitable divorce proceedings, having this evidence would be invaluable. Elena had no idea how thorough I could be when pushed. Next, I began making a list of all our shared assets, bank accounts, the house, investments. Over the years, I'd been the one handling most of our finances, so I knew exactly where everything was. I wasn't going to let her walk away with more than she deserved. Around 2 a.m., I heard the front door slam. Her footsteps were heavy, and I could tell she was drunk. She tried the office door, rattling the handle when she realized it was locked. "Mark!" she yelled. "Open the damn door!" I ignored her. "Are you seriously doing this right now?" she continued, her voice slurring. "You're being such a child." When I didn't respond, she finally stormed off, muttering curses under her breath. I stayed up until dawn, combing through everything. Our finances, her social media accounts, even the phone records I'd pulled earlier in the week. What I found only deepened my resolve. David wasn't the only one. There were others, 3 more to be exact. Men she'd been meeting during work trips and girls' nights. Each one had left a trail, text messages, receipts, even photos. By the time the sun rose, I had built a detailed timeline of her betrayals. I wasn't just going to confront her, I was going to dismantle her carefully constructed lies piece by piece. That morning, I left the house before she woke up. I needed a lawyer, someone sharp and ruthless, who could help me get out of this mess with my dignity and assets intact. By the time I sat down in the lawyer's office, I was running on caffeine and determination. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Clara, listened intently as I laid out the situation. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "You've got solid evidence," she said, flipping through the printed texts and photos I had brought. "And you've kept your emotions in check, which is good. This can work in your favor during the proceedings." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and bitterness. Clara outlined the plan. We'd file for divorce, citing infidelity as the cause, and request an equitable division of assets. Since we didn't have kids, the process could move quickly, but Elena's behavior made it clear she wouldn't go down without a fight. "I want this to be airtight," I said. "No loopholes, no surprises." Clara smiled. "That's my specialty." By the time I left her office, the wheels were in motion. I had a clear timeline for serving Elena with divorce papers, but I wasn't done yet. This wasn't just about ending the marriage. It was about making her feel the consequences of her actions. That evening, I came home to find her waiting for me in the living room. She was sprawled on the couch, her arms crossed and her expression smug. The sight of her sitting there, so unapologetic, reignited my anger. "We need to talk," she said, her tone dripping with false authority. "Oh, we'll talk," I replied, dropping my bag by the door. "But first, let me ask you something. How long were you planning to keep up this charade?" Her face faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, my voice calm but firm. "David. And the others." Her eyes widened, and for a split second, I saw panic flash across her face. Then, just as quickly, she sneered. "You're paranoid. There's no one else." I chuckled, shaking my head. "You're really going to double down, even now? I've seen the messages, Elena. I followed you to the hotel. I know everything." Her composure cracked. "You spied on me?" she spat, jumping to her feet. "That's insane! You're insane!" "No," I said, meeting her glare with unwavering confidence. "What's insane is lying to your husband while screwing 4 different men." She opened her mouth to retort, but no words came out. Instead, she grabbed her wine glass from the coffee table and hurled it at the wall. The glass shattered, echoing through the room. "You're such a bastard," she hissed, her voice trembling. "You're just trying to make me the bad guy." "I don't have to try," I replied. "You've done that all on your own." For a moment, we stood there in silence, the air thick with tension. Finally, she stormed upstairs, slamming the door behind her. I didn't follow. Instead, I sat down and started drafting the final piece of my plan, a public revelation of her betrayal. Not to humiliate her for the sake of it, but to make sure everyone, including her closest friends, saw her for who she truly was. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Elena stayed locked in the bedroom, likely nursing her bruised ego, or plotting her next move. I didn't care. I was already 2 steps ahead. While sipping my coffee, I finalized the post I'd been working on all night. It wasn't a rant or a tirade. It was a straightforward account of the truth. No embellishments, no cheap shots. Just the facts. I started with a simple sentence. I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but the woman I married turned out to be someone I didn't recognize. I detailed her infidelity, including the timeline I'd pieced together and the evidence I'd gathered. I kept names out of it. This wasn't about dragging David or the others into the mess. It was about Elena. I ended the post with a simple message. To anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation, trust your instincts. Don't let someone make you feel crazy for seeing the truth. And remember, walking away isn't weakness, it's strength. I scheduled the post to go live that evening on social media, ensuring it would reach our mutual circle of friends, her coworkers, and anyone else who thought they knew the perfect Elena. Before I left for the day, I placed a neatly folded envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside were the divorce papers, along with a note. By the time you read this, everyone will know the truth. Don't try to contact me. My lawyer will handle everything. I spent the day at the gym, pushing my body to its limits to channel the anger and adrenaline coursing through me. I refused to let her actions consume me. This was about reclaiming control, not just of my life, but of the narrative she twisted to her advantage for so long. When I returned home that evening, she was waiting in the living room. Her face was pale, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She'd seen the post. What the hell is wrong with you? She screamed, jumping to her feet. You've ruined me. Ruined you? I said, laughing bitterly. No, Elena. You ruined yourself. I just gave people the full picture. You're a monster, she shouted, tears streaming down her face. Do you have any idea what this will do to my career? Oh, I'm well aware, I replied, my voice icy. Maybe next time, you'll think twice before lying, cheating, and treating people like they're disposable. She lunged toward me, her hands balled into fists, but I stepped back, shaking my head. Don't. You've done enough damage. And in case it wasn't clear, I gestured between us, is over. Sign the papers. She crumbled onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. For a brief moment, I almost felt pity for her. Almost. But then, I remembered the pain she'd caused, the humiliation, and the countless nights I'd spent questioning my own sanity because of her lies. I turned and walked out of the house, leaving her to face the fallout of her actions alone. The silence that followed my departure was deafening. I didn't return home that night or the next. Instead, I checked into a modest hotel across town, needing space to process everything without her presence suffocating me. It was strange. After years of marriage, I felt freer than I had in a long time. I checked my phone, and as expected, my social media post had gone viral within our circle. Friends, coworkers, and acquaintances flooded the comments section with messages of shock, support, and disbelief. One comment stood out to me. I always thought there was something off about her. You deserve better, Mark. It wasn't the validation I was seeking, but it felt good to know people saw the truth. Elena's reaction was immediate. She didn't bother trying to call me. Instead, she bombarded me with angry texts, alternating between threats and pathetic attempts at apologies. You're a coward for airing our dirty laundry. You'll regret this. I'm sorry, I was confused. Let's talk. I didn't reply to any of them. She had lost the privilege of my attention. The next day, I met with Clara to go over the legal process. She was impressed by how quickly I'd gathered evidence and filed the papers. This is going to be straightforward, she assured me. Her infidelity is well documented, and the court won't look kindly on her actions. Still, there was one more loose end to tie up, our shared home. That evening, I returned to the house to pack my belongings. I had no intention of staying there, and I wanted to make it clear to Elena that I was done. When I walked through the door, the place felt different. It no longer felt like home. It felt like a hollow shell of the life I thought we built together. She was there, of course, sitting in the kitchen with a glass of wine in hand. Her face was red and puffy, her demeanor less combative than before. You're really leaving, she said quietly, her voice shaky. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I grabbed a box from the closet and began packing. Books, clothes, personal items, everything that mattered to me. "Mark, please," she tried again. "I know I screwed up, but we can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." I stopped and looked at her, the weight of her words hanging in the air. For a moment, I thought about all the good times we'd shared, the memories we'd made. But they were just that, memories. The person sitting in front of me wasn't the woman I fell in love with. "There's nothing to fix, Elena," I said, my voice steady. "You made your choices, and I made mine. This is over." Her tears started again, but I didn't stay to watch. By the time I finished packing, she was still sitting there, staring at her wine glass like it held all the answers. Walking away from the house was both a relief and a challenge. Part of me felt lighter, as though I had finally shed the weight of her lies. But another part of me, quieter yet persistent, felt the sting of failure. Not failure in leaving her, that was her doing, but in how much time and energy I had wasted on someone who didn't deserve it. I spent the next few days setting up my life anew. I found a small apartment on the other side of town, nothing fancy but enough to start over. The simplicity was refreshing, a stark contrast to the chaos Elena had brought into my life. My days were filled with meetings with Clara and preparations for the divorce proceedings. Every document I signed felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage, and I welcomed it. Clara kept me updated on the case, assuring me that things were moving swiftly. "She hasn't contested anything so far," Clara said during one meeting. "That's surprising, considering her personality." "Give it time," I replied. "She's not done yet." Sure enough, a week later, Elena tried a new tactic. She sent me a long, rambling email filled with half-hearted apologies and manipulative language. "I know I made mistakes, but I still love you, Mark. Can't we find a way to move past this? Think about all we've built together." Her words were hollow. The same woman who had lied to my face, who had betrayed me not once, but multiple times, was now trying to guilt me into giving her another chance. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on myself. For years, I had let her needs and whims dictate my life, but now, for the first time, I was free to prioritize my own goals. I hit the gym daily, pushing myself harder than ever before. The physical exertion helped clear my mind and rebuild my confidence. I also reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in ages. Many of them had distanced themselves during my marriage, sensing the toxicity that I had been too blind to acknowledge. They welcomed me back with open arms, offering support and encouragement. One evening, I met up with my best friend, Ryan, at a bar downtown. Over a few beers, I told him everything: Elena's affairs, the hotel confrontation, the divorce. "Man, I always knew she was trouble," Ryan said, shaking his head. "But you're handling this like a champ." "I don't feel like a champ," I admitted. "But I'm done letting her dictate my life." "That's the spirit," he said, raising his glass. "To a new chapter." "To a better one," I replied. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself rediscovering parts of myself that I'd lost during my marriage. My sense of humor, my creativity, my drive, they all came back stronger than ever. Elena, meanwhile, was floundering. Mutual friends told me she'd been spiraling, her reputation at work tarnished by the fallout from my post. I didn't take pleasure in her downfall, but I also didn't feel sorry for her. She'd made her bed, now she had to lie in it. The divorce hearing was scheduled for the following month, and I was ready. This wasn't just about legalities anymore. It was about closing a door and never looking back. The day of the divorce hearing arrived with an odd mix of emotions. I felt a sense of finality, but also an undercurrent of unease. Despite my confidence and preparation, I knew Elena well enough to expect a spectacle. She thrived on manipulation and drama, and today would likely be no different. Clara and I arrived at the courthouse early. She was calm and collected, reviewing the case details with the precision of a seasoned pro. "This is a slam dunk," she assured me. "Stick to the facts and let her dig her own grave." Elena arrived shortly after, wearing a sharp black dress and an expression that screamed defiance. She glanced at me briefly, her eyes narrowing, but didn't say a word. Her lawyer, a younger man who looked more like a college intern than a professional, shuffled nervously behind her. It was a stark contrast to Clara's confidence. As the hearing began, Elena's lawyer attempted to paint her as a victim, claiming she had been neglected emotionally and had made mistakes out of desperation. It was almost laughable. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes, seemed unimpressed. When it was my turn to present my case, Clara took the lead. She laid out the timeline of Elena's infidelity, backed by the mountain of evidence I had gathered. Text messages, hotel receipts, photos, it was all there. As each piece of evidence was presented, I watched Elena squirm in her seat, her composure cracking with every damning detail. She had multiple affairs over the course of their marriage, Clara stated firmly. This isn't about a single mistake. It's a pattern of deceit and betrayal. Elena couldn't hold back any longer. She stood abruptly, cutting off her lawyer mid-sentence. This isn't fair, she shouted, her voice shrill. You don't know what it was like. He was never there for me, always busy with his own stuff. The judge raised an eyebrow. Miss Keller, sit down, or I'll hold you in contempt of court. Elena's lawyer tugged at her sleeve, whispering furiously, but she ignored him. He made me feel invisible. If I strayed, it's because he pushed me away. I stayed silent, letting her words hang in the air. Clara leaned over to me and whispered, Let her keep talking. She's doing more damage to herself than we ever could. By the time the hearing ended, the judge had seen through Elena's theatrics. The ruling was swift and decisive. The assets would be divided equitably, but I was awarded the lion's share, given her infidelity and the clear evidence of misconduct. Elena's lawyer tried to argue, but it was a losing battle. As we left the courtroom, Elena stormed up to me in the hallway. Her face was a mix of rage and desperation. You'll regret this, Mark, she hissed. I'll make sure of it. I looked her straight in the eye and said calmly, The only thing I regret is not walking away sooner. Clara pulled me away before Elena could respond, and as we exited the courthouse, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The moment I stepped out of the courthouse, the crisp air felt different, cleaner, lighter. For the first time in years, I felt truly unburdened. The legal proceedings were behind me, and Elena's venomous words were little more than echoes I refused to entertain. Clara patted me on the back as we walked toward the parking lot. You handled that well. She gave us exactly what we needed with her little outburst. She always did love theatrics, I replied, smirking. That evening, I met Ryan at the bar again to celebrate. The atmosphere was electric, filled with the chatter and laughter of people living their lives. It was contagious. To freedom, Ryan said, raising his glass. To new beginnings, I replied, clinking mine against his. Meanwhile, Elena was unraveling. Mutual friends told me she'd lost her job, likely due to the fallout from my post. Her reputation was in tatters, and the pity she tried to milk from others quickly turned into disdain when they saw through her lies. One day, she called me. I didn't recognize the number at first, but when I answered and heard her voice, I felt an odd mix of pity and irritation. Mark, she began, her tone a strange mix of anger and desperation. We need to talk. I made a mistake. You've made plenty, I replied, cutting her off. And I've already moved on. Do you really think you're better off without me? She asked, her voice rising. Yes, I said firmly. I don't think, I know. I ended the call and blocked her number, knowing there was nothing more to say. A month after the divorce was finalized, I felt a deep sense of closure settling in. The chaos Elena had unleashed on my life was now just a memory, a chapter one could finally leave behind. I realized something profound during this time. My worth wasn't tied to someone else's validation. One day, while organizing my new apartment, I came across an old photo album. It was filled with snapshots of our life together, vacations, celebrations, everyday moments that once held so much meaning. For a moment, I considered throwing it away, but instead, I tucked it into a box and pushed it to the back of my closet. I wasn't holding on to those memories out of longing but as a reminder of where I'd come from and what I'd overcome. That evening, I received a surprising message from one of Elena's former co-workers, a woman named Michelle. We'd met a few times at company events, and I remembered her as someone sharp and insightful. "Hey, Mark," the message read. "I just wanted to say I saw everything that happened, and I'm sorry you had to go through that. I always suspected Elena wasn't what she seemed, but seeing the truth play out was something else. You deserve so much better." I replied, thanking her for her kind words, and we ended up chatting for a while. Michelle told me that Elena's behavior at work had alienated many of her colleagues long before our marriage imploded. Her charm and manipulation had worked for a while, but people had started to see through it. "She burned a lot of bridges," Michelle wrote. "But you came out stronger." Her words resonated deeply. For so long, I had felt like a victim of Elena's betrayal, but now I saw myself as something else, a survivor. One weekend, Ryan and I decided to take a road trip to clear our heads and celebrate my fresh start. We drove along the coast, the wind in our hair, and the open road ahead of us. It felt like the physical embodiment of the freedom I'd fought so hard to reclaim. At one scenic overlook, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The pain, the anger, the humiliation, it had all served a purpose. It had forced me to reevaluate my life, to confront my weaknesses, and to build something better. As I stood there, staring out at the endless ocean, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Elena no longer had any power over me. She was just a footnote in the story of my life, a lesson learned the hard way. When I returned home, I felt ready for whatever came next. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer defined me. They were a testament to my resilience, proof that I could weather any storm.